What's going on, everybody? One of my favorite things to do is to dig into data. And especially right now, I think as the market is slipping, as the market for cards is softening, one of the things that does is it presents a buying opportunity. And there are some cards that have really crashed, and other cards that have been flat, and some cards have even gone up a little bit. So one of the things that I wanted to do is I wanted to look a little bit closer in this video with just an idea of a snapshot. This is not a 50 card investigation. It's just a snapshot of what's the reason some cards have plummeted more than others. Because there's more than just demand. You know, we're always talking about demand, and I do believe with something like a collectible, demand is the biggest driver of price. But I also think that we can't forget about supply. We can't forget about pop reports. We can't forget about, the steepness of some of the drops of some of the cards. Now, whether it be modern versus vintage or vintage versus vintage and modern versus modern, whatever it is, I wanted to take a look at a handful of cards, some newer, some older. I'm going to start with the newer stuff. And I wanted to try and see if I could find some sort of takeaway as to the reason why some cards have gotten hit harder than others. Now, we all talk about, the market fluctuates more with modern cards. I think that's true. And the stability of the vintage market is more secure. I think that's true as well. That's not earth-shattering news. That's not something I'm bringing to the table that nobody's ever said before. The question, though, is why? Why are new cards the cards that seem to dive harder? Now, of course, if there's a player who gets hurt, if there's a player who loses his starting job, if there's a player who gets in legal trouble, and we've had some of all of those things happen. If there's a guy who goes on an extended slump, their cards are going to get hammered. We know that. And that's not a new phenomenon. And that's one of the reasons that a lot of people go, nah, I'm staying with like the Pokemon, because those guys aren't going to get in legal trouble and those guys aren't going to go into slumps. But that's not my thing. I'm a sports card guy. And so why then do some cards dive more than others, even when demand is going up? For example, Steph Curry cards have been going down. I don't see any reason why there would be a loss in demand for Steph Curry. I don't get. Joe Burrow, he started slow, but Joe Burrow is, in the top 3 most collectible football players right now. So why have his cards crashed? There's got to be a reason. There's got to be a reason. How can a player be playing well and his cards be crashing? It's not just about demand. So we're going to take a look at some data here. Now, I've mentioned it before. For a while I was pulling all the data myself and it took forever. But I'm going to be doing more data stuff and more data-based research and videos because I have the Market Movers app, and if you're not into Market Movers, if you're happy with what you've got, keep it. But the Market Movers app makes it really easy for me to pull data. So the positive part of that is I'm going to have more data because it's really, really easy to pull. If you want Market Movers, I do have 20% off with the promo code MIDLIFE. I'll put up a graphic right here. But if you're not interested in Market Movers, that's totally cool. But they did, when I reached out to them, they did say, yeah, we'll give you 20% off in 2 weeks for free for trying it. And it's not 20% off for a while. It's 20% off forever. But if you're not interested, that's totally cool. Market Movers has unbelievable data that is instant to pull. So that's what we're going to take a look at. Some Market Movers data. I want to look at the plummeting cost or plummeting prices of some new cards versus some old cards. And then I want to take a look at the pop reports and the growth of the pop reports and which cards have been having the most increase in population and which cards have been pretty flat with population. And how do those things play a role or possibly play a role in the values in a down market? It's pretty interesting. And whenever I do this, sometimes I have a guess of what's going to happen. Sometimes I have no guess. For this one, I had no hypothesis. I had no guess as to what the results would be. But there are results that have a very close to a direct correlation as to the cards that plummeted the most versus the cards that plummeted the least. And a factor, not the only factor, but a factor that I think played a pretty important role. I think you're going to find it interesting. So let's check it out.
All right. So first off, how about a 2007 Topps Kevin Durant in a PSA 9? Now, I'm going to mostly use PSA here because just the supply is bigger, so it makes the numbers a lot more accurate because the averages are higher because there's such a larger supply of sales. So if you look at the peak on this card in a PSA 9, it peaked out at $1,800 back, 2-3 years ago. So, back in that boom in 2020 and into 2021. Now look at where it's at now. Oh my goodness. $55 is what it's currently selling for. It's down 97%. I mean, that would be painful if you bought that at $1,800 and now it's worth $55. So what has the population done during that same time? Okay, so what was the population at the peak and what is the population now? Now, again, one of the cool things about the Market Movers app is it does have a lot of population growth data. So look at where it was. Back in the end of 2020, there were 525 PSA 9s of this card. But now, in November of 2023, there's 1,900. That is a lot more. So we went from 525, and in just a couple of years, 3 years, 2.5, 3 years, there are 262% more PSA 9s available. That's not even to mention the PSA 10 population growth. So another card. So again, I'm starting with a few moderns, then I'm going to go to some vintage, but I think it's important to compare them. The 2007 Topps Steph Curry rookie in a PSA 9. Now, this is just the base. It kind of shocked me what these sell for. So at the peak, back in the end of 2020, early 2021, it was selling for $3,900 in a 9 for a base card from 2007. And it's still selling for $1,400. So this one did not drop nearly as much as the Durant. Now, obviously, it's way down, but it's not down as much as the Durant. It's down 64.1%. So a big drop. I mean, 64% down in, just under 3 years is a pretty big drop. So what's the population of the Steph done? Well, if we go back to the end of 2020, December of 2020, there were 843. Again, this data is all pulled from Market Movers. And now, it's obviously a lot higher, but it's not gone up the same percentage as the Durant. So the population is up to 1,400 in a PSA 9. So it went from 843, just under 3 years ago, to 1,400 now. So it's up about 66%. Now remember, the Durant was like, well over 250% more. This one's 66% more. And the price hasn't dropped as much. But keep watching, because you might be surprised at something that we find here as we keep looking. So a 2020 Prism Joe Burrow base, again, this is a base, but it is a PSA 10. It peaked at $712. So back at the end of 2020, this card in a 10 was $712. And I mean, when we look at Curry and Burrow, those guys are super hot still, right? They're still super collectible, as collectible as they've ever been. And then we look at the current Joe Burrow PSA 10 value. It's gone down to $140. Now, in the meantime, during that time, Joe Burrow has gotten way more popular. But the value's down 80%. I mean, it's down 80%. You bought it for $712, it's now worth $140. I mean, that hurts. So what about the population? What has the population done? Well, back at the end of 2020, that's right when the card came out. That's right when the card started getting graded. The population was 10. It was at 10. And needless to say, it's a lot higher now. So in December 2020, it was 10. Now it's at 6,600. So it went from 10 to 6,600. I mean, that's almost 66,000% increase. So these were kind of rare. And this is a 10. The Curry and the Durant were 9s. There are almost 7,000 10s of this card. It takes a lot of people to be able to sustain a value, which is probably part of why it hasn't sustained. Now we look at a vintage card, our first vintage card, the 55 Topps Roberto Clemente. Now this is a lot more stable. The angle of this trend line is not nearly as steep. We were looking at Mount Everest before, and now it's more like, the bunny slopes, but it is still down a fair amount. It did peak there at 11,500. There was one way up there, and then one a little bit less, and then the rest of them were quite. So there were really just a couple of sales that pulled this average up. The current value, the most recent one, I should say, sold for $5,500. So it's down 52%. But if you look at the trend line, remember, those two at the very beginning, they're kind of skewing this number a little bit, just because the average is based on a fewer number. So let's look at the growth of the population of the 55 Topps Roberto Clemente rookie in a PSA 6. So December of 2020, 621 of them were out there. And it has gone up. There have been more that have been graded over the last 3 years, but not a lot more. 647. So where the Burrow was like 65,000% growth, the Clemente, 4.2% more than there were 3 years ago. So the supply of a nice condition Roberto Clemente is not really going to be growing very rapidly, if much at all. But they're still pulling packs with the Joe Burrow Prism. How about an Otto Graham rookie in a 5? That's a nice condition for a 1950 Bowman. So it peaked there for $1,300. Now look at this one. The trend line is actually up a little. Now, that first one versus the last one is down a little, but the overall trend is going up. So it peaked at 1,300. It's currently at 1,080. So it's down 16.9%. But remember the Durant that was down 97%? And again, this is just because that one was kind of high. You throw that one out, and it's pretty much up. This card's really kind of up, other than that one first sale back there at the end of 2020. If we look at the 1950 Bowman Autogram PSA 5 population growth, back in December of 2020, there were 119. And there are more now. There are more 5s than there were. But 119, that's a really low population. Telling you, those early vintage football are rare. Now there's 129. So in the last 3 years, they've added 10. They've added 10 PSA 5 Autogram rookies. That's an 8% increase, 8.4% increase. Versus the, 16,000% increase of the Burrow. And the 275% increase of the Durant. So the next vintage card, I went with another football card because I did a baseball card, but whatever. So 1957 Topps Johnny Unitas in a PSA 6, it peaked out at $2,230. And it's down a little. You can see the trend line is going down, but it's not like that Mount Everest that we saw before of the huge drops. And it's currently selling for less. It's clearly down. It's clearly down a fair amount. $875 is the current sale price. So it's down 60.8%. I mean, that's a fair amount. That's a decent sized drop. I mean, it's not a 97% drop like the Durant and the population growth. So if we look at the population growth of where we were 3 years ago, there were 832. Now remember, the Johnny Unitas rookie card is a triple print, by the way. So that's one of the reasons the population's higher. It's one of the reasons that the Bart Starr is more valuable, is because it's not a triple print and the Johnny Unitas is. The current population of the Unitas in a PSA 6 is 903. So it's up 71 over the last 3 years. Up 71. So now we say, okay, we have all this information, and that's an 8.5% increase in population. So we have all this information now, and we say, well, what does it tell us? And some of us would say, well, it tells us that when there's a huge increase in supply, then the price drops. Yeah, it does tell us that to a certain extent. But what's the common denominator that keeps prices stable for some cards but not others? Well, this is actually my takeaway. I looked at the numbers for a while, and remember, this is just a snapshot. It's not the be-all and end-all. But I listed the cards by the current population. The Burrow with the most, 6,600. Then the Durant, 1,900. Then the Curry, 1,400. The Unitas, 903. The Clemente, 647. And then the Autogram with under 130. And then when you compare it to the amount that the card dropped in value over the last 3 years, because it's a down market, so most things are down. It's almost a direct correlation that the higher the supply, the bigger the drop. The lower supply dropped the least. The only time that's not true is Burrow versus Durant. But other than that, other than those two being flip-flopped, that's kind of impressive.
So a couple things I'll say. The more the population, there's no doubt about it, the higher the population of a card, the more potential that that card will drop faster. If there are only 10 of a card, it only takes 10 people to want the card for the card to keep its value. But if it goes from 10 to 10,000, it's going to have a lot of demand to keep the same value with that huge increase in supply. And I think what this told me, at least, is when there's a large supply, the price is more volatile. When there's a high supply, the card crashes easier. That autogram card, there aren't many of them. And I'm not surprised that because there is such a low population, that it's been pretty flat. In fact, the trend line looked like it was up a little bit, but the most recent sale is down a little bit from 2 years ago. I find it interesting, but this does not, we can look at this in a macro sense, meaning a larger sense of the whole market, or in a smaller sense. When you go to a card show, sometimes you get killer deals. Sometimes there's a dealer that will just let something go for super cheap. And one of the reasons they'll let it go for super cheap is because if they're not having people crawling all over their table, in order to sell, look at the supply of cards in the room. If there's a huge supply of cards in the room and people aren't just fighting over cards at your table, you're probably going to come down a little bit in price because you got to cover your costs and you've got to find a way to get buyers when there's a huge supply. Now, I've been talking about this, Whatnot Card Show 3 coming up. And it's this weekend, right? It's the November 16th to the 19th. And I think it's a really good buying opportunity. And I'm not just saying that. I think it's a really good buying opportunity. There are going to be over 1,000 dealers, and they're going to be selling over 500,000 cards. There are going to be so many rooms going this weekend. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. There are going to be so many rooms going that the buyers are going to be spread out across all those rooms. And there are going to be some big names, right? Sports Card Investor is going to have a room going. Card Collector 2 is going to have a room going. Mojo Sports is going to have a room going. Those are going to pull a lot of people. And it's going to leave it kind of thin across everybody everywhere else. So if the supply of sellers, if there's a whole bunch of rooms, if there's a whole bunch of sellers that are going to be listing a whole bunch of cards, a lot of cards means volatility in pricing. And I really think it could be a buying opportunity. I think I'm going to be checking out stuff all week. All weekend, I'm going to be checking stuff out. And I think there's a chance there's going to be some stuff selling cheap because the supply of stuff that's on that platform this weekend is massive. Now, also, I am giving away that Mickey Mantle All-Star. And I'm giving away the Mickey Mantle All-Star to anybody who follows me on Whatnot and just in the comments of any of these videos where I mention it, tell me your Whatnot username. And if you don't have a Whatnot username, if you don't have a Whatnot account, remember using my link, and the link will be in the pinned comments below and into the description below. You can get $15 free in credit. So you can find a card that sells for $25. You have $15 credit. It costs you $10. I mean, What a great deal. I think there are going to be deals this weekend. I really do. And you can go in with a $15 credit. And by doing it, when you use my link, it'll automatically have you follow me. And then in the comments below, you just put your new Whatnot username, and then you can win the 1960 Mickey Mantle All-Star in a PSA 4, which is a beautiful card. This is a great opportunity. Supply is going to be really high on Whatnot this weekend. Take advantage of it. Take advantage of the 15 free dollars and enter to win the Mickey Mantle All-Star. Why not? I really think that the cards that have the lower population are more stable. It's like, you'll ever wonder, like, why is it never like snowing along the ocean, or rarely snowing along the ocean? Why is it never 120 degrees next to the ocean? And the answer is that because the ocean stabilizes the temperature. In order for it to get that hot right by the ocean, you have to not just heat up all the land and all the air there, but all the water, which is kind of cool. And so what it does is it keeps the temperature generally in this range of like 50 to 90 degrees. It doesn't get super cold. The ocean doesn't freeze over, at least unless you're way, way up north. And the ocean keeps it stabilizes the price, or it stabilizes the temperature. Just like I think low population stabilizes the pricing. The higher the population, the more likely the price is going to go crazy. But when there is a low population, it doesn't take many people to want it to keep the price where it is. So the price is much more stable. So keep that in mind. You're going to get the best deals when there's high supply. On a macro sense, like the market as a whole, a Joe Burrow Prism rookie card as a whole, or a micro sense, like a card show, or like a Whatnot Card Show 3 weekend. The higher the supply, the more likely there's going to be a big dip in prices. That's my take. Tell me what you think about this data. And if you haven't signed up for Whatnot and at least tried it out this weekend, because again, all you have to do is try it out and you get 15 free dollars and you could win the mantle. Why not? Let me know what you think about all of this. I look forward to your comments as always. And check out Whatnot this weekend. You're going to get a deal if you do.